Welcome to Threads of Enlightenment, a podcast devoted to helping you overcome challenges in your life that prevent you from becoming the best version of yourself. Each episode features interviews with people from all walks of life about their journey of self-development and the principles they utilize to overcome their fears to achieve their desired outcome. Ready to be enlightened? Here's your host, Ken Primus.
Welcome to another episode of Threads of Enlightenment. Guys, you know this is one of my favorite space right here is because I have an opportunity to thank our guests because I know that they're coming, in my eyes, with a couple of things I deem very expensive. That is their time. Time is one of the most precious commodity offered to the human spirit while we're here on this planet. How we utilize that time will tell me much about you. You have to learn how to honor her, respect her, because once you do, everything changes. Your relationships, your encounters, your everything about what you do changes once you recognize the power and the value of time. The other is the journey. The journey is a creator. It has created the individual before us, and we are excited because I know this gentleman has come with much with him, and we cannot wait to partake of all those stuff that he has. What are those stuff? Wisdom, knowledge, insights. We want to get to know him so that we can become better human spirits while we're here on this planet. Myron, thank you so much for coming to Threads of Enlightenment.
Good. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
It is an honor, sir. One of the questions that I ask people is because I mentioned to you briefly that we have two journeys. One is in the independent and then the interdependent. And that interdependent journey gives us the opportunity to serve mankind. So my question to you is, how do you serve mankind?
Well, that's a wonderful question. And it's always somewhere floating in my mind. But I guess by example, I try as much, or by actual work that I've done, and meaning up to now, I'm 71 going on 51. They call me the jackhammer. And fortunately, I'm healthy physically, so I can continue to reach for the kind of stars I want to reach for, which is, I guess, if someone took a glimpse at my life, I at 48, 49, I think 50 even, I hit rock bottom business wise. For me, I mean, I'm sure for anybody, but for me, it was particularly devastating, emotional, financial, everything else you could think, and kind of took me, it's kind of like dying without dying. Took me out of life, out of the game for, many years. And unfortunately, it wasn't until I was 67, 68 that I reinvented myself. So I repeat, 67, 68. I wish that was 38 or 48 even, but it wasn't meant to be like that. So I guess as somebody, and everybody goes through challenging times, some more extreme than others, some more difficult than others, obviously, but everybody has challenges. I'm sure on whatever journey they're on. Eventually, after 16, 17 years, Ken, I kind of reinvented myself. At that particular time, it was real estate, and how that happened is, and I think the something for your audience to take note, which I'm sure they do, is stay in the game. Meaning that even though I was down and out for 16 years, meaning trying to find where I belong and how I could live my second life, so to speak, after losing everything in a business and reinvent myself, I kept going to these, I kept getting up every day. I didn't kind of literally fall apart mentally, even though at times I felt like it. Unfortunately, physically, I stayed stable. I don't know how great healthy, but I stayed stable. And every day I would get up, put some clothes on that looked like you were going to work, even though I wasn't necessarily going to work, and looking for opportunity, just doing whatever job I could do to keep going. And I would go to these meetup groups, particularly where, people know anything about meetup groups. They're in most cities in North America, I'm sure everywhere in the world today, where younger people in their 20s and 30s hang out, and they usually talk about technology, goals and dreams. That's the focus, probably now more than ever, is the world of technology, not the world of real estate. But they're filled with their future. They're extremely optimistic, as they better be, at 20 and 30 years old. They only have tomorrow to look forward to, not at somebody at 60, 70 or 80. So there's no baggage, good or bad, yet, not of any consequence yet, much, right? So that was always very consciously or not consciously, I don't remember, a good kind of environment to be in. And I would go to quite a few of them, as many as I could, just kind of be like this invisible, not just invisible person listening, talking, and hearing, and making, I wouldn't say friends, but certainly making acquaintances. Until one day I went to one that 8 years, 9 years later. I have to stress the time factor because everything took forever. It's a significant factor, maybe 12 years later. So there was this young gentleman in his 30s, started a real estate business. It was where I live in Montreal, Canada. He had no reason to be there, Ken, because no more than you would have going to a nursing. Well, maybe you're medical, but let's say you would not necessarily go to a conference of plumbers, let's say, no respect, or building contractors, because that's just not your industry and not what you do, and that's understandable. So he had no reason to be there because the conversation is on technology, not on real estate. They're all that age; they're all in their 30s. But he came; he was curious. I really don't even know why. He was just curious. It was an entrepreneurial meet, but no one ever discussed real estate because that was it's a difficult and more complex subject for most people in their 30s to discuss, get involved, whereas technology was more obviously friendly for them and more easier for them to jump on. I understood. So after the meeting, 9 o'clock at night, kind of befriended him, and then, long story short, as the cliche says, he was growing his business and successfully, but growing it like any young entrepreneur. He needed more funding to buy properties. In his case, on market, and I found that for him, not for me, and that was good, and that was remunerated. And then in his search for properties, as he was growing, he couldn't control and do his business all by himself. It was fortuitous timing. He needed help. It's just the way it worked out. It was at the right timing in his business, and certainly the right timing in anything was better than where I was in mine. And my traits being like a jackhammer, as we know, with that it's a machine for industry, for real estate, but it's a metaphor for perseverance, never giving up, and finding a way or making a way in life. That machine is definitely a great metaphor for that. And I found him some properties, remunerated, up market, and then I realized my skills could do the same thing for more investors. Obviously, there's many, many more investors, and which is what I did. So that was at 68, and now 5 years later, 2024, November, I've done that, and I also am very, very good in bringing strategic partnerships, meaning that, like, I put together 𝐂𝐍𝐈𝐒, which some of your audience may have heard of on American Got Talent, that famous model, and New Balance. So if you Google now, any of your audience Googles 𝐄𝐍𝐉𝐎𝐘, it's not what it was, but it was a brand that they started, and I put them together. I was working with somebody who had the license to 𝐂𝐍𝐈𝐒. She would just finish her pregnancy, looking for her next adventure financially, and New Balance had no business with her before then. This was about 2012, 2013, and I put them together. I reached out. The hard part was New Balance. We already had the contact with 𝐂𝐍𝐈𝐒, to be fair and frank, but we certainly had no connection with New Balance any more than I have with Nike today. Not a hole in the wall. But when I did my research, that it could be a good fit for both. If I could make it happen, I did. A year later, they formed a partnership. And I've created partnerships with other known organizations like Madison Square Gardens in New York, people have heard of maybe, and Radio City Music Hall, etc. So that's also my expertise. And at 71 now, going to be 72 in a month. As you can see, my key thing is the drive and the energy in what I do. As long as but I have a fixed time limit, in my opinion, because I am physically healthy now, as long as I can do it. But I don't have forever. The fact is, I am going to be 72, not 32 and 42. So that's my quick story.
Yeah, I tell everyone I start a podcast to remind people about the value of time. We have to learn, and it's my goal is to help those younger ones, if you will, Myron, to get it early, understand the value of time early, because it's like yourself. I just turned 63, so congratulations on the upcoming birthday. You're a little ahead on this road on me, before me. And so congratulations on that. One of the things that Myron had mentioned is to keep moving, man. This is one of the hallmarks in personal development, in life. Just keep moving. And I try to bring in some pictures, if you will, so that the young ones can understand that stagnation is one of the complacency is the enemy of growth. I would tell people, when you look into nature itself, and nature is one of our most valuable teachers out there. we can see that when anything is stagnant, there is danger there. So when you are stagnant in your life, there is danger there. That's because you haven't made a decision to do anything, and you keep going into this circle and so forth. But here, one of the most richest advice and information you'll ever get in your life, valuable stuff. Keep moving. Keep moving.
Yeah.
One step
You know,
every
and I know,
day is farther than where you were
right.
yesterday.
Action is power. Okay.
Yes.
And you don't know, it's like you're on a road, let's say you're going on a car trip. Well, if for some reason you can park the car for a few minutes for whatever the reason, but if you're going to stay stationary for an hour, 2, 3 hours, you're literally going nowhere fast. And, and,
Mm-hmm.
and that's going to be a very frustrating experience. So you may not know. In fact, most of the time you don't know where you're going necessarily, but you do. But what seems to happen is strange mystical thing, almost like there's angels, that once you get on a road, certain turns and detours become visible where they were never visible before.
Yes.
But for sure, if you don't start on the road, I know it's a cliche, but cliches are cliches for a reason because they're true,
Mm-hmm.
and just live it. But if you don't start on the road, you have no clue what's going to happen. So it is true 100% of 0 is 0. There's no question. So even 1 or 2% leads to 5 or 6% because, I definitely believe in angels somewhere. Otherwise, I never would have met this gentleman. So, but you have to show up, so to speak. You have to keep going. You have to try. If you're just going to hibernate or hide away or lock yourself away, it's the beginning of a self-destruction. That is a very tragic, no matter what your scenario is, obviously. So yeah, number one, I would say keep going. And you don't have to know why you keep going, but just keep showing up because you don't know why necessarily. Keep trying because sooner or later something's going to click. It's like a boxer. If he keeps jabbing and all that, I think sooner or later he'll hit with something. Try to stay on your feet. So that's been incredibly important. And the other thing which is invaluable, as you learned, is that you make sure you associate with people that are positive, uplifting, and that could inspire you, and that can help you move forward. Not what the last thing you want is negative, or you can turn on the TV and the radio, all that stuff. Of course, or toxic. So who you hang around with, including family,
Mm-hmm.
including friends, is extremely critical. Because you should not have any patience for anybody that's overly negative. You just can't afford it. It's too short, the whole thing. And remember that whether you're 25 listening to this or you're 95 listening to you, if you don't one day, if you don't do what you want to do, one day you're going to wake up and you're going to run out of time. Trust me, you're going to run out of time. As you all know, you were once 25 and so was I. So, or 30 or 40. You're going to run out of time. You're doing what you want to do now, and you approach it with a sense of urgency because you got to do it while you can do it, meaning your health and all those other great factors. It's the same thing. You do if there's something you want to do, whatever it is, you go ahead and do it. Do not wait, and do not let anybody tell you it can't be done. Only you can decide it can be done. Because at the end of the day, it's very short. At the end of the day, all you're going to remember is what you did or what you didn't, and the great memories you had in trying or not trying. That's all that's going to matter. The rest is going to be extraneous.
Yeah, one of the things that I find, and I tell people that when you hang around and don't when you become complacent and you're not moving, there's a couple of things that will always greet you, if you will. It'll greet you and hug you in the morning. Such thing as anxiety, depression, these dark forces. If you're not being active and proactive and so forth, will love to spend time with you and cause you to become destructive, if you will, because once you begin to walk down those roads, your perspective become warped in the sense where you don't
Right.
see a way out. But as you get around people, as Myron was talking about, he was getting to think about it. He was being stretched because he's walking into an arena that is totally unfamiliar to him. Tech people, young kids, doing their thing, and he's just in the mix. And life has a way of rewarding your obedience, if you will, or your discipleship. Meaning that if you continue to move forward, what happens is that synergistically things began to happen. It takes time. It took time for that young man to be placed in a situation, a thought comes to him and he said, hey, I need to go to this particular thing. He may have been roaming around some other place and just needed to get into that area where Myron is. And it took some time, but Myron was there all the time, every time he can get to go
Yeah.
someplace, and
Remember,
he
it
was
was 16
rewarded.
years before I reinvented myself.
Yeah. Yeah, it takes time. One of my favorite persons on this planet is William Shatner, because I remember as a young man, I loved him watching in Star Trek and whatever. But I watched that man through life reinvent himself so many different ways and different times, and that about him always inspired me. And
Absolutely.
anytime I was in a dark space or whatever, I would use his as my motivation, his mind, his picture, as something I would use. I said, don't give up. And one of the other things I remember reading, Colonel Sanders didn't, I think he got his retirement check at 65 and Social Security, and said, wait a minute, something's wrong here. And he embarked on getting his favorite thing, his recipe, moving. And I think it was, he was 68 when someone
Absolutely.
took that information and did
And
something else.
Ken, William Shatner, by the way, is originally from Montreal, went to the same
Yep.
university I did, Miguel. I mean, he left for
Wow.
California very early in his life, but that's a supreme example. He's 90 something today, and you still see him everywhere as long as his health, which is still seems to be intact. Obviously, he's able to do certain things. That's the only thing that will hold you back. He's out and about and doing all kinds of things and involved as much as ever. And he obviously will be involved as long as his health allows him to be involved. That's a great inspiration and a great example. You're 1,000,000% correct.
Yeah, he has been my inspiration in many of my dark times, because I would look at him and said, he did it, I can do it, and it will keep me moving forward and getting up and moving. One of the things that we do here is go back in time, because I want to get a little more foundation on you, Myron, as far as what was your childhood like? What was that? Because I believe that space right there is where a lot of us, our perception of life, how we deal with people, how we develop relationships, all of those different things like that began to have their genesis around that family nucleus, if you will. What was your family like?
No, that's a great question. I think what I recall from what I can remember till early 20s, it was positive. My father and I were close. I used to play sports a lot, football in particular, and he used to coach the teams. He loved it. He loved coaching me, but I think he just loved coaching. And he was probably the last football coach. If you could see a picture of him, which is incredible, a bunch of, I don't know, 20, 30, 15-year-olds, and the coach behind them in a gray sweatshirt with a cigar in his mouth. And that was 1964. I mean, there's not too many coaches you're going to see with a cigar in their mouth today in a team picture. It's just, you could really think that's a relic, an antique. It really makes you laugh. I mean, talk about dating yourself and talk about putting a time frame, 1960s. That's certainly an antique. I grew up as a teenager in the 60s, which was an incredibly exciting, innovative, and again challenging and revolutionary time in America and the world. What happened? The music exploded because the music of the 60s, as we all know, and the Beatles and everything, changed the world forever. And that was the golden age, or the golden 60s, as people go back and they go to 70s and the old, and they still, of course, as long as there's music, I'm sure they will love it, because I think whether you're 12 years old, 15 or 50 or 70, there are some music of the 60s everybody knows, especially the Beatles. You can't help but, or whoever they may be. So there's so many groups. So the innovation and the talent just
Mm-hmm.
blew people away. Of course, the politics with the Kennedy 2 assassinations and Martin Luther King, in the States, and the civil rights movement. There was so much, of course, Vietnam War. So, from within short 8, 9, 10 years, it was like a century has happened. So the 60s literally shook things up radically, if I remember, and then the dress, the apparel, the clothes, the wear, the long hair. I mean, what a radical departure, right, from the 1950s, and set the pattern for, at least for a while. So it really was a radical, abrupt, and it must have been, and it was abrupt because, from the late 50s couple of years later, early to mid 60s, things started to change dramatically, okay, in every facet of life. So that, to me, that was pretty quick. It wasn't a short change. But I fortunately grew up in that. I was only 16, 17, 18, 15, 14. So I was in the thick of it all. And, being at that age, it was extraordinarily exciting, exhilarating time. So for me, I remember in the 70s. So I consider myself very fortunate to have done that. Having said that, generally, it was my parents were good people. We brought up in an area that generally, I would say they did not get divorced like that. They stayed married. I think their marriage, one would say, maybe had its ups and downs, probably like most marriages. A brother sister. I would say my childhood, generally speaking, Ken, fortunately, was pretty stable compared to most.
Hmm.
I was always curious. I worked for a community newspaper. So when I was young, like 18, 19, I got an intern job just because I was curious to report on the local news. I didn't work for a major city paper as a journalist, and that was exciting and fun. And I did things even then that were unusual for the paper, interviewing top level people. I just went after them, and they never did, but they approved it. Generally speaking, but generally, my childhood was. My family grew up at a time, and my parents, I remember, were very still focused on monetary reward and doing something that, that would ensure what you like, but had a monetary reward at the same time, and you could balance that. Where I think I'd like to think that's changed a bit today, because at the end of the day, I really believe obviously you have to pay your bills, and obviously you need X amount of dollars to get on with yourself, but you really have to do what you love, whatever it is, okay, whatever that is, okay, to excel in whatever it is, and to be meaningful. And hopefully, by doing what you love, you make a few bucks along the way. Nothing that will keep you going. If your interest, which is fine too, really is to accumulate huge, vast sums of fortune and money, there are certain areas to go into that you have to fortune. We
Hmm.
know that, okay, and certain areas you don't go into, okay, because they just won't give you that kind of thing. So it depends on that ambition. But I've always had a nagging feeling ever since I was young that that's why I love your question, and nobody's really asked me that. That even I remember was from 16 on that there's something I would be able to bring to the world, but it would not happen till much later in my life, later now, okay, and even later, and I'm not sure what that is, but I'm working on it, and it would be something meaningful, because for some reason I always had this nagging reminder inside of me that I want to do something to be, to use the cliche, maybe bigger than what I am, because I really feel that I could impact thousands, millions of people in a positive way. Example.
Well, I think sharing your story and, as they say, rising from the ashes is where we learn lots of our wisdom. Because when we're living and everything is great, we don't really learn anything about ourselves that much. We're enjoying everything, we're getting everything we want. But when we encounter that at the time of our testing, the dark times, where we have to now get in touch, as you said, reinvent. And I tell people we get in touch with the part of us that has been dormant for years, that is the creator that is inside of us, that has been sitting there not being utilized, and he's not being called upon until it's necessary, and usually when the dark time comes. Introduce us, Myron, to that time of your life when you had lost everything, and how did you make the decision? Because I always say, try to encourage the kids, is that you have to make a decision within yourself, and you believe that regardless of what anyone says to you, mom, dad, grandmother, friends, you make that decision to make that to take that one step after the other and continue. What was the incident that caused you to lose everything? What was your mindset there, and how did you begin to what steps did you take to begin to escort yourself from that dark place?
Well, that's a good question. The other thing I wanted to bring up, and you give me this opening to do it, is that I've been very fortunate. I think maybe it's a cliche. The power of, I cannot estimate the other kind of secret or hidden, or maybe not so secret, not so hidden ally you need is love. I know it sounds like a cliche, but I was fortunate to be married to the same woman for 37, 38 years. She's from Brooklyn, New York. I mean, that's why. And I think, well, it's not itself the entire answer, but if you're lucky enough, which I think it is, to have someone to love you and you love them, whoever he or she may be, okay, that's an incredible power. And one of the things that human beings can do more than fortunately than a lot is that ability to love. I mean, that's why we love dogs, we love cats, all these things. But particularly to love somebody else and to make it work is something that separates from total barbarism us. And if you're lucky enough, which is a lot of it is luck, timing, luck to meet somebody, because in this big planet there's a lot of people, but there's very few that somehow two people can click together. It's amazing how difficult it is sometimes. That's why there's divorce and all that. So for a long period of time, you can meet, and the honeymoons are great. That's easy, like my father said. But we all know that. But only time proves, and it does, and like anything, time proves the value of anything. So I was fortunate that, and I still do, is during how difficult times were, I had someone to go home to that I look forward to. Having said that, but at the end of the day, I still have to take care of me and I had to fix me up, as she
Hmm.
reminded me. All I could say is that for some reason, many, 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 many days, Ken, I was on certain pills that helped my anxiety, went to psychologists and all these kinds of people, and went through a lot of hell. There's no question in 16 years. And I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. Well, maybe that. But, I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy how low I had to sink to. And I just never surrendered at the end.
Yeah.
And then sometimes you meet what I call dream makers versus dream killers, in life. And, you know, and there are some people who just want to stamp you out like a cigarette. But, okay. So I just, no matter how low it got, and it got pretty low, and sometimes I wouldn't even feel myself. I can hardly even feel my body moving, getting into a car and going somewhere. I would hang out in a coffee shop for hours and hours and days, and just because you could do that, and just stare at people, and they would stare at me, and just to be somewhere. But I would get out of the house, number one. I wouldn't
Hmm.
stay in bed, number two. I never did that. I never did that because that's like the beginning of the end, literally. Never stay in the house. I had to get out to somewhere, even when I didn't have a job, which was often. And even if
Hmm.
I was just in a coffee shop, I was out. There were people, there was life. And it was certainly better than the alternative. So it just was, as I repeat, it was a very slow, extremely difficult, frustrating process that I just never surrendered. I kept going every day, looking for opportunity, talking to people. Some days were worse than others, of course, very worse than others. And there were many times near the end of it where I said, well, I keep reading about people who reinvent themselves, do this, do that. Doesn't look like it's going to happen to me. I mean, forget it. That's just a good story or a great movie, but it could happen. And again, like you said about Mr. Shatner, if it can happen to me, literally, it can happen to anybody. Okay,
Yeah.
so there's no magic formula. I don't think. Don't surrender. Don't surrender. I guess I just loved life more and wanted to live more, and maybe I felt there was a second calling to reinvent myself, and I'm correct, there is the stuff I wanted to do. It turns out I was right in that, but till I got to that point, uh, I just didn't surrender. It's like you're wandering looking for water in the desert, and as long as you can last and survive without the water, you keep going before you decide to fall down on the sand. And that's what I kept going, but for 16 years.
Yeah, it takes time. I tell people it takes time to do anything. The concept of right away things is just a concept. It's not a reality in the sense how it's designed is to prune things that you begin to change your perspective. And you do that through time. And as you adjust your perspective, I tell people one of the key is adjust your perspective in your current dark space, and you will see how light it becomes when you start looking at the good things, starting to be grateful for the fact that you're alive, starting to step out of that mentality or mindset that you are suffering. And I tell people pain is okay, but suffering is a choice. We choose to suffer. You can choose not to. But everything takes time, and you have to learn how to be obedient to yourself. You have to learn how to trust yourself. You have to learn how to, I tell people, always be kind to yourself. watch what you say to yourself because you're actually listening. And so learn to speak positive things when it's not, you don't feel like it. Don't be guided by your feelings. Start tapping into laws that are governable, understandable in your life. Start tapping into them. The law of momentum. If you keep moving, the law of momentum picks up, and there's another law that it will activate. And so you have to learn to live your life based on laws, and once in a while step out of feeling that will keep you locked into your state and keep moving.
But remember, Ken, for everybody, that learning curve is different. And
But
many
yes.
times when you're trying to learn, it's easier. Words are easy and said to done, but it's hard to believe it's ever going to happen sometimes. So the only way you have a chance in hell is to keep going and not give up.
Keep moving. Many times I told a story about this podcast. When I first started, it was from my book that I wrote, Threads of Enlightenment, and I had 10 chapters. So I knew I had 10 episodes, and I was good with that because I knew that beyond that, I knew that I had to come to put myself in a space where I'm vulnerable, open, and I was never like that. So I did my first 10 podcasts, and anxiety and everything began to set in, and the podcast was taking off, and I stopped the podcast because I was a mess. I was like, I can't do that. And it was about a month, 2 months later, I contact my brother. I'm like, hey, I got to move past this. And I asked him to be my first person to interview and stuff like that. So it was that how I went back and got past of the anxiety and the fear of what I was doing and what I wanted to do. And sometimes it becomes so overwhelming that you panic and you lose your sight. As Myron said, I kept going. I called my brother, and I it was comfortable there. I interviewed a couple of friends after that, and I started to become a little more adventurous, if you will, and step on beyond the comfort zone. And that's what happens in life. Every one of us has a learning curve. Don't look at me and try to,
Right.
no, 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 no. That'll get you frustrated. Stay within you. Just keep moving. That is the key. Just keep one step at a time. And I promise you, and Myron is proof, I am proof, that you will see how the synergy, the universe, some people say, God will begin to orchestrate stuff to come into your space that will give you that little desire you have inside of you that you didn't know that you would peek into once in a while. And then when it happens, you'll go, oh, wow, I always wanted to do this, but I never thought, and here you are. So just keep going, man. I'm telling you,
Right.
Don't stop.
I'd like to sum up what you're saying. I always say people is that do not fear failure, but fear being in the same place next year as you are today.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's keep going
And I
because
keep,
action is hope and action is power. Okay, no
yeah,
matter
it
what it
is.
is, no matter what it is. Okay, and it's therapeutic. Inaction is deadly. It can kill you.
Yeah. That stagnation again. And I know
It kills
I
you.
grew up in a church, and there's this verse that says faith without works is dead. So you got to put in the action. You can't just sit there and
Yeah.
go, wow, wow, wow.
No.
But if you do nothing, once you, like I said, and that's the principle, once you begin to become active, the principle is faith without works is dead. So if you believe in something, you begin to step out, it will, because that principle exists, it will begin to formulate and cause things to happen in your life, guys. And just hang in there. It only took 16 years,
That's right.
but it happened. And so there are times when you're going to fall down and say you're wasting your time. There are going to be times when you're going to cry and feel that, what are you doing? I'm wasting my time. All of that stuff is a part of it. All of it is a part of
Right.
it. But you get up
Absolutely.
after you finish, wipe your eyes, and then you go back out there. And usually that is the day, one of those days, something like that is when something happened. I remember I was sick, and I was young gentleman in high school, and I was sick, and we had a track meet, and I got there and I told my coach, I said, I can't run. He looked at me, says, oh, this is the perfect time to run, that you're sick. And so I got out at the race, and I broke the school records that was sitting there for years because he said, it's the best time. He says, trust me. And I remember watching Michael Jordan playing one of his best nights when he was sick. And so it's something that happens when we go and push the self that is there to greet us. And I want to encourage all of you guys that are listening to Myron and I, do not give up. People give up and they commit suicide and different things like that. They do all kinds of different things as a result of being in that place because they felt that's the only way, that there's no other way. I just read an article and I saw a thing about it. This young man that they showed a couple of minutes before he committed suicide in his car because he was overwhelmed with all the bills. So please do not give up. We don't want that to happen. Life is much more precious than that. Myron talked about why he kept going, because he loved life. So please love life. And we're going to provide Myron's information for you guys to have access to him, because any of you that are in those dark places, he came out. He has some information that you can utilize, how you get out there. And from a conversation, we're going to put all those links together so you can have access to him, because that's what we're here for at Threads of Enlightenment. Myron, talk to us about today, where you're at. You've been through much. You've reinvented yourself. You are looking at doing more things, because I tell people, once you begin to move and continue to move, you've said that you felt that there's something beyond being normal that you have to do in your latter days, if you will. What is it in your heart, Myron, that is pushing you on when many have sat down and say, I'm going to take a break here and check out?
Well, just simply put, I'm filled with the future. I like to say excited, but I have something to say, something to write still. And we'll leave it at that.
Yeah. And I love that part about us as you moving, that unrest, I call it, that resides in us, that propels us not to give up, that unrest. When we want to.
I got a restless soul. I have a restless soul.
That's for lack of a better terminology. That's it. You're just restless. There's things to be done, and because of that, you are making yourself known in the game. You're getting up in the morning and you're getting out there and doing the things necessary to be a part of the game, if you will. So you mentioned that you have a lot of things still left to do and so forth. So here you have these folks that are listening to us. Myron, give someone that was back when you had lost everything, give Myron some advice, if you will, when you're looking back from this place there, looking to him. What would that advice be, as those young ones that are listening to you and I to have this conversation about not giving up?
I guess the only thing easier now to look back is that if it's not a physical health issue, which is, as we know, could be fatal and deadly, you don't have a second chance. You have the capability, no matter how much you fall down, for whatever the reason, generally, or how much you hit rock bottom, to come back. Okay, you have a second chance. Again, if I repeat, if it's not a health issue, which could be fatal, you could not have a second chance. As we all know, it's over. Could be, if it's, God forbid, terminal or fatal. So that could be any age, of course, unfortunately. But barring that, and whatever happened in your professional journey or personal, it's both, that you've lost something or you hit not just a roadblock, but you really emotionally, and I emphasize emotionally, hit a very low period, and you're extraordinarily disappointed and discouraged for good reason, very good reason. The only thing I could say is, if it's not health, I could say it may seem like the end of the world, and it is the end of the world at that time to you, but it's not the end of the world, okay? Because you can, unless you're 99, come back if you want to. You can also, I every day I read myself this, you'll love this, you could either feel bad about yourself, which you have every right to do, or you could do something to make your life the best you possibly can. So it's a choices. I mean, it's as blunt as that. I don't have patience anymore for people who surrender or give up. They give up. I understand, but that's their choice. It is, most of the time. You got to keep fighting back. You got to keep fighting back. You got to keep fighting back because it's a battle, and you got to keep fighting back. And to think anything else is fooling yourself. You got to keep coming back as long as you can. As long as your health allows you to keep coming back, you got to take advantage of it, because sooner or later you won't have that advantage. It'll be over.
Guys, all of you young folks that are listening out there,
That's the bottom line.
Yeah, you heard. And it's amazing how this entire podcast was basically about not giving up. So someone needs to hear this. And so we want to thank Myron for coming in and sharing his wisdom, his knowledge, and his insight into his life. And he has afforded us the opportunity to come in and learn from him. And we want to thank him so much for coming and sharing his precious time with us. And we were going to provide everything for you guys to get access to him and get in his space, get his books, get to know him and get to learn from him, and especially about not giving up, because that is one of the most important things you'll ever have in your life. And once you keep moving, I promise you that you will see changes that will manifest in your life. And again, Myron, I want to thank you so much for coming by Threads of Enlightenment. Thank you so much.
Thanks for tuning in to Threads of Enlightenment with Ken Primus. Hopefully you're now feeling more empowered to overcome the challenges in your life, whatever they may be. Share that inspiration with others by telling them about this podcast, rating it, and of course, remember to subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. For more connection, you can find us on Facebook and Instagram by searching for Threads of Enlightenment. Until next time, stay enlightened.